Hello, and welcome to the Proactive Caregiving Podcast. As a CPA with over 20 years as an industry accountant, Jessica stepped away from the corporate world to become a full-time caregiver for her mother. Having learned invaluable lessons along the way, she is now here to share those with you and to invite you to join her on this caregiver's journey. Here is your host, Jessica Cannon.
Hello, everybody. I'm so glad you're here with me today. I am the Proactive Caregiver, and I specialize in educating others on how to be proactive by empowering you, the caregiver. If you cannot take care of yourself, then you cannot take care of your loved one. You know, in the past, I've shared with you in previous blogs and podcast shows just how easy it was for us to dismiss many of Mom's early signs of dementia because, you know, she had, for many years, we witnessed her Manic Depressive Bipolar tendencies. But another reason was because we knew so little about dementia overall during the 1990s and very little about Alzheimer's. The limited information about Alzheimer's just didn't seem to fit what we were witnessing in her. And her age or her behaviors, none of that seemed to match up. So we were left puzzled for many years. But that's because Frontotemporal Dementia, or also known as FTD, is more so associated with personality, behavior, and language. FTD is the most common dementia under the age of 60, but is not very well known at all. It is a degenerative brain disorder that primarily affects the frontal and temporal lobes of the brain. FTD is a gradual progressive decline in behavior, language, movement, and even memory, but memory usually stays intact, relatively preserved until the later stages. But according to the Association of Frontotemporal Degeneration, or AFTD, it typically strikes younger with onset ranges anywhere from 21 to 80. The majority of FTD cases occur between the ages of 45 and 64, which creates a substantially greater impact on work and family and economic burden, more so faced than with families living and dealing with Alzheimer's. So today's guest is going to be caregiver Candice Williams. She's going to be coming on with me shortly to share her story in connection with FTD. Candice has been caring for her mother, Robin, since her diagnosis of FTD for over 7 years. Robin was diagnosed at 57 years old, and now at 64 is entirely dependent on Candice. And while caring for her mother has been somewhat of a challenge, Candice still finds it quite rewarding. Candice and I recently bonded over our experiences, including our frustrations with the lack of education and resources available for those diagnosed with early onset dementia. So because of this, Candice created a blog called Our FTD Journey. Her mother and Candice, they worked together to create this safe space to support and build a community where others dealing with the same thing could have a safe space to share and express themselves. So thank you, Candice, for coming on with me today. I really appreciate it.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So I know early years ago, and even more recently, whenever I would speak about Mom and her dementia, I found myself recounting the before and after times of diagnosis. So tell me, what was life like for you and your mother before any symptoms started to appear?
I mean, things were all right. You know, we used to do things together and go out and, you know, normal mother-daughter stuff, I guess, most of the time. Mm-hmm. And we had our relationship issues like any typical mother and daughter, but I mean, you know, things were definitely different than what they are now.
Right. So as things started to change, what did you seem to notice? Looking back, I'm sure now, in the moment, it was harder to notice because I know it was for me. But looking back, what were the things that you started to notice as she started to change?
I started noticing like signs of aggression. It's verbal and physical. But when I was growing up, my mom was bipolar, so I just thought that she maybe wasn't taking her medication again.
Right.
And, so I started, really, I started backing off because I was just like, I just thought she was being toxic.
Yeah.
And I didn't want that in my life again. And, she was starting to cuss more and, get in my face. And I'm like, yeah, I can't go through this again.
When I read through much of your blog and some of the entries, I could not imagine this early age and this change. It's so intrusive into the lives of her life and yours. Did this cause an early retirement for her as an educator?
Yeah, she ended up having to leave. She was actually in the process of taking her practice to become a full-time teacher. Because at the time she was just substituting, and she was struggling with some areas of it. And, we just thought, some people struggle with different things like, math or whatever.
Right.
Math has always been a struggle for her. And, she took it maybe a few times, but the cue was, one of the many cues was having issues in school, not able to teach the lessons, having kids actually teach the lesson, and showing up late or not showing up at all, or not knowing where to go in her class, her class, reading and writing issues, PPA, or primary progressive aphasia for people who don't know what that is, language issues. So, yeah, it seemed like a lot of stuff happened at once. But really, I think it first really started with the aggression and with the physical aggression.
It's amazing just hearing you say that. I find it just so interesting how you and I, our lives have paralleled so much, because my mom was an educator as well, and that was a lot of her early things that we didn't notice was showing up late to school because she lost her way to school. When she got to school, the students they loved her, absolutely loved her. And so it was something that they learned to kind of help cover up for her. And it just amazes me that, we're in different sides of the world. I'm in Texas and you're in New Jersey, and yet our mothers have so many things in common with this type of diagnosis.
My mom's students all loved her too. And I'm thinking they probably covered up for her. I mean, I know they definitely did when they were teaching their own lessons.
Yeah.
So.
I think mom had some sweet treats and somewhat bribes on the side that if, especially her first period, if she showed up late, they knew to not get out of control, to bring attention to the fact that she wasn't there. So they didn't want her to get into trouble. And I get that, but at the same time, it was kind of like, had we all known a little bit sooner that something was happening, because then it was the same thing when at the end the day was over with and it was time, the school day was over with, and for her here in Texas, the school day ended at 3:30 she's a middle school teacher, and so ending at 3:30 but not showing up at home till 9 or 10 o'clock, it was kind of hard, wondering where have you been all this time and trying to figure out, did you get lost on your way home? It's sounded funny and just ironic at the same time, but then you kind of, those are the little cues that you kind of have to pick up and see, this is happening for a reason.
Yeah, it's actually pretty amazing. Like, over 7 years in, and I look back and I'm thinking, I can probably see signs earlier than what I thought. Now, I estimate that I started seeing symptoms in her when she was about 50.
Yeah.
But I had no idea anything about FTD, like, at all.
Right. Yeah, neither did I.
And
it was the same thing for us.
Yeah, and I had suspected, like, some kind of dementia was going on with her, but then I blew it off as to say, nah, she's too young.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way. She's too young, not my mom. But if I really look back, I actually think I estimate I saw symptoms 7 years before diagnosis, but I actually think it might have been 8, 9, 10 years before diagnosis.
Yep, I agree. We had that same kind of realization. So did you struggle with getting her diagnosis at 57?
Yeah, we actually started the process when she was about 55. And it started with the psychiatrist. And the psychiatrist just thought it was her bipolar.
Mm-hmm.
So she adjusted her medication and, I guess tried more therapy with her. It wasn't helping. My mom was still complaining about different things. And finally, the therapist told her to go to her primary doctor. And primary doctor did, metabolic testing on her and checked the B12 levels and, routine blood tests. And everything came up okay there. No vitamin deficiencies or anything like that. And it was time for the neurologist, and the neurologist did the cognitive testing, count the coins and say the week, who's the president, blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. And she did okay on some of it, but she did bad enough that the doctor was concerned and said, let's set you up for a PET scan. Yeah. And she got the PET scan, and that's when we got the diagnosis. And then I was like, FT, what?
Yeah.
I had no idea. I was completely clueless about what that was.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. I think when we were going through that early time of diagnosis, we did so much of the same thing, which was part of the frustrating thing with having these tests done and coming back and this is normal and that's normal. And so nothing's wrong. She's just having a bad day. And I thought, yeah, people have bad days, but consistently like this over years. And we had that same reaction with the bipolar and that kind of repelled us and kept us wanting to visit her and spend time with her more often, just because it gets to a point where it is toxic and it's hard to be around someone who's in that state all the time. Mm-hmm. But, we did the same thing with the PET scan. And when ironically, I don't know if you had this feeling, but when that result and that diagnosis finally came out, it was kind of a relief just knowing, being able to put a name to all the craziness that was happening.
For me, it was devastating. And because I didn't have full comprehension what dementia was. Mm-hmm. I had an aunt who had Alzheimer's, but I was not exposed to her when she was sick, so I didn't really fully understand it. I knew it was bad.
Right.
And I knew she wasn't going to get better. And I cried for 3 months straight. When she got, day and night. Then one day I just said, okay, it's time to pick yourself up and jump in. Mm-hmm. Because got to make every moment count now.
Right. They have to. So as you continued to take care of her, was she able to care for herself, or did you notice that from that point of diagnosis, did she decline or seem to decline faster as the years continue to pass?
It's so funny that you would ask that, because I was thinking one day when my mother was hiding her symptom or trying to, she seemed to progress slower, but it was like once she got the diagnosis, it was like a relief to her. And and like she could stop holding back. I don't know if that makes any sense.
It does. I think, yes, I remember similar with Mom. I think that's one of the things that Mom always used humor to hide her limitations. And she would always say, oh, I was just having a senior moment. And, we all kind of laughed with it, but I think it was a little bit more mixed. I mean, I think it was flipped for me. I think I had more of a relief because it was like this, it's not all bipolar, but it's not Alzheimer's, and it's not this, it's not that. And it was just frustrating trying to figure out what was happening. But I think for her, it was more of, she got depressed even more because it kind of added to that whole concept of, I'm broken.
Yeah. When I moved in to take care of her, she was still like, she could still feed herself, she could still cook, she could still do all those things, but she needed help.
Right.
And, I told myself from the beginning, my role as a caregiver is not to do everything for her, but to support her until she can't do it anymore herself. And I think that's one of the mistakes that we make when we go into this, is that we want to do everything for them instead of letting them do as much as they can do for themselves until they can't.
Right.
One thing my mom used to tell me in the beginning, she used to say, don't treat me like a baby. And so I had to learn to play a more supportive role. Obviously as time went on, that the supportive role is still there, but I'm, hands-on now. I'm all in now.
Right. It kind of happens over time where I tried to, I think because I was transitioning and I was still trying to keep a full-time working career outside of her world, and stepping in intermittently and then realizing I needed to step in a little bit more often and gradually trying to do more for her. And then I realized at one point, the more I was doing for her, the less she was doing for herself. And that was frustrating, but sad, because that's when I just kind of switched it in my mind that it was easier for me to step in and do things for her, even though it kind of got to the point where she was expecting it. But that's the way I was seeing it. She's just expecting me to do the dishes. She's expecting me to do her laundry. But after a period of time, and it did take that time of looking back, and she wasn't, whether I was doing it or she was doing it, it just, the interest, the ability, it just slowly started to stop, and somebody had to do it.
Right.
So one of the other things I thought was so interesting, among all the parallels that our worlds have, is your mom also has a little dog that has become her shadow, just like my mom. So how is that working for her? Does it seem like it helps her?
Her and Bob, we got Bob over 5 years ago. We got him from the local shelter. She had been asking for a dog. She kept saying, I want a baby, I want a baby. And so we took her down to the shelter, and we already knew, like, she pretty much had picked them out from photos. And so took her down there, and they met, and they became fast friends.
That's cool.
He's been stuck to her side from the beginning, and he is extremely protective of her. He will not let any men near her.
Yes, that's the same way Mom's dog was. I had moments where I tried to bend down to kiss her goodbye, and this little schnauzer was like a cat, and she would sit almost on her hip while she was laying on the couch. And if I leaned in to kiss her goodbye, he would dart at my face like he was ready to bite me, not wanting anybody to get close to her. He got very protective.
Yeah, he's extremely protective of her like that. When it comes to men, when it comes to women, he doesn't mind. But we think that I think that has to do more with where he came from before we got him.
True.
So, because I don't really know his past, I know that when he was picked up, he had been on the streets for about a week.
Hmm.
And then he came to us and got a life that I'm sure he never imagined he would have. I mean, the dog just came in from a play date. So, I mean, he's got it made.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that at first, I really loved that she had her dog with him. She called him Guido. I was glad that she had Guido with her because it was something that he made her get up. He made her get up to feed him. He made her get up to go let him outside. Without him, she didn't have a reason to get up and move other than sometimes getting up to go to the restroom herself.
Mm-hmm.
It was a good combination until it wasn't. That aggression, kind of on our end, that aggression took over and she started cussing and yelling and kicking him away. And it was like, okay, this is not good anymore. It's not healthy for the dog anymore than it is for her.
Yeah. My mom has never been aggressive towards him. Well, maybe, no, that's not true. But we nipped it in the bud really quick. So.
Good.
And he loves her. I mean, he absolutely loves her. And sometimes at night, he'll just go sit right by her.
And keep her comfy.
She doesn't talk to him as much as she used to. She will smile at him sometimes, and he sleeps with her. He curls up with her in bed. So they're still friends.
Good. I hope that lasts for as long as possible.
I think it's for life. My mom has calmed down a lot. She's not as aggressive as she used to be at all.
I'm glad. So when you were starting to look into, you're told this FTD, this Frontotemporal Dementia, when you started to look into this, what did you find the most frustrating about it?
How little information there is.
Mm-hmm.
How little support, especially if you're early onset. When you go to Google, you type in Alzheimer's, you can find stuff all day.
I know.
And you'll have infinite amounts of stuff to read for the rest of your life.
Right.
Type in FTD, you'll find stuff, but it's a lot of the same stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And very, very little support. I mean, before COVID, I didn't even have any support groups. Couldn't find any in my area. Now with COVID, I attend virtual ones, but
right.
I couldn't find any support before.
And that support is so important because it made such a huge difference for me, being able to be around other caregivers, whether it was FTD or Alzheimer's or Lewy bodies, just being around other caregivers who understood the disease or the deterioration in itself and the behaviors, the responses, the emotional changes. It makes such a big difference having people who know what it's like and know what it feels like to go through this and watch your loved one go through it.
Mm-hmm. It is no walk in the park.
Mm-mm. No, it definitely gave me a different perspective on our bodies. And it scared me at first because Mom was my age when, again, hindsight, looking back, Mom was my age when she started to have her symptoms and issues. And I was thinking about it earlier today. I was like, I can't even remember her exact age when she had to have a defibrillator placed in her heart. And it was before she was 55. And so now it makes me think about my health and how to change things and make it more of a daily habit of good health. But I had a lot of the similar frustrations. Finding that information was, sifting through the internet and finding doctors that had published books and how many different gerontologists how very little, I didn't even realize how little there were out there until I started looking into this information.
I've been trying to get doctors to talk to me, and, I still can't get them to respond to me. So if there's any listening, please contact me, because I would love to talk to you and get more information. And, maybe you have some information to contribute to the blog, and, can help out here. Because I can learn so much from webinars, but most of the people running webinars are not doctors.
Yeah. I was finding the same.
Before COVID, I was going to seminars, and then COVID happened, and there went my seminars, which is why I switched to webinars. And I do webinars like all day, every day, mostly 5 days a week. So I can gather as much information as I can to put up on the blog to share with people to help educate them, along with sharing our story, because it's important.
It is.
But I would really love to hear from some doctors, and not just gerontologists, but psychiatrists, psychologists. Like, I want to hear from them all. Like, please.
I know. I think a lot of that gap is, aside of the fact that they're, their focus is seeing patient after patient and getting as, of course, maybe not so much post-COVID, but getting as many patients in throughout and seen throughout the day that they don't have a lot of time to spend with you. And then the other part, I feel like there is that assumption that you can find the information you need out on the internet, or it's out there somewhere, but it's really not out there as much as people think.
Yeah, even Google Scholar. I've been to Google Scholar, and I've read through some of the stuff, and I don't even understand half the stuff that's written in there, because it's written for other doctors and other practitioners.
Right. All the medical terminology that's like, okay, can you break that down in layman's term, and so I can understand this and see how this connects to our day-to-days with mom?
Yeah, I want to hear from all neurologists, whatever. Hey, I have a page up there, and I'll be posting videos soon once I can, find a good editing program and protect, my content, and, use my page as research.
Right.
I'm offering that, help me, I'll help you. I hate to say it like that, but I need input that I am not privy to.
Right.
So, just putting it out there.
Well, and that's why we're here, to educate each other and help educate others, because the thing for me, and I'm not sure how much of a difference I started my journey with siblings, and it was helpful until, again, it wasn't. But you are coming into this as an only child. So this information and having support and relying, there's a need, and there's a brokenness out there that we need to fill in those gaps.
Yeah. I have, outside of the blog and, social media, I don't have any real support. I have support groups now, but it took 6 years for me to find support groups. But outside of that, all my mom's friends, 100% of her friends walked away.
Yeah.
My family doesn't come around, except for my grandmother. I have a cousin that I do talk to regularly, and, she asks about my mom. But outside of that, I don't really have the support. I have support from people in my church, like a couple of the pastors from the church. Okay. But that's about it. I can probably count on one hand, outside of what I do, the people that are supportive.
Yeah, I think I got to the point where I was head down in books and online researching as much as possible, and not so much talking. Yeah, I was able to talk to a lot of mom's doctors, and kind of piece things together. But I think I got to the point where I reached a new level of frustration, is that aside of support groups and going to even other healthcare providers and other service providers, I got to that point where I was just frustrated all the time because it seemed like I knew more. At some point, I knew more than they did. And I don't say that to be arrogant. There really is so little information out there for FTD, and everybody is very quick to compare Alzheimer's. They automatically assume that, oh, if they're not losing their memory yet, or that's not a symptom, then it's not dementia. And there's so much misunderstanding out there that needs to be corrected.
Well, I actually agree with you. Doctors don't know anything about FTD. My own primary doctor, when I updated my medical file after my mom got diagnosed, and I told her that my mom has early onset and frontal temporal, and she was like, "What?" And I'm thinking, oh, that's comforting. And she's like, she's so young. Like, she was surprised. And I'm like, really?
Yeah.
And, I, about a little bit over a year ago, I had to take my mom to the emergency room because, and here's a little tip that people don't tell you, because there's a lot of stuff you don't know until you're in it.
Right.
My mom developed a vagus nerve issue. And she had passed out and was unresponsive, and I rushed her to the hospital. And so I'm talking to the emergency room doctor, and he was like, "What?"
Wow.
I'm like, okay, like everything, but you don't know. I mean, he understood dementia. I think he was surprised at the early onset, and I think the title, the name of it, surprised him. Like, I think I feel the same way you do. I know more about it than professionals who should do.
Right.
So, I don't like for them. I don't understand. I mean, I understand that Alzheimer's is the most common form of dementia, but why aren't they learning about the other ones?
Yes.
They're just as important. I mean, there's 4 main ones.
I know.
And they seem to only know about Alzheimer's. I don't know how much they know about Lewy body or vascular, but it seems they only learned about Alzheimer's in school. And that's a little disturbing.
Well, and it's interesting that you say that, because part of the research that I've been going through, the reason doctors don't know as much about dementia as they should or could, I don't want to point a finger, I'm obviously not a doctor, is because dementia is actually considered an elective when they're going through their med school. And I'm sure when doctors are going to school and they decide what type of doctor they want to be, what area of the body they want to specialize in, it's not something that they would choose on their own, unless I have found 1 or 2 doctors here that have been solid, excellent sources for me, just because they themselves have lived through this, either with a spouse or their own parents. So they had the knowledge, they knew the symptoms, they knew what to look for, they knew what questions to ask. But other doctors, which I've had to take mom and find other doctors and get that second opinion, that I just felt like, okay, this is not your area of expertise. I don't want to continue bringing her to you and paying co-payments and going through this process if you're not going to have any knowledge that would help her. So we're going elsewhere. And sometimes that's what you have to do. It adds more stress.
I did not know that dementia lessons, courses were elective. Now that I know that, I might have to advocate for them to be necessary, because the thing is, it doesn't matter what field of medicine you're in, you're going to come across somebody who's got dementia at some point.
Of course, especially with this early onset, you're going to come across it a lot more, because this is happening more. It's not going away. And when I read reports about the numbers of caregivers increasing, a lot of it is Alzheimer's and dementia. And so we know more about Alzheimer's, yes, but that and dementia is still that part that's lacking. And
yeah, that and dementia is like an afterthought.
exactly.
And these should not be electives. These should be, part of the curriculum.
Right.
Because it doesn't really matter what kind of doctor. I mean, cardiologists, whatever. They should all be educated because, I remember going to a doctor's appointment in October last year, and there was a guy there that, it's funny because once you have lived through this, you can spot it a mile away. I can even tell when I'm driving, which is really weird. And there was a guy there that clearly had some issues going, early stages, and they seemed clueless to what was going on with him, but I could spot it right away.
Right. Isn't that interesting that because you're living this with your mother, you're able to see it and know it. And I do the same thing when I'm out in the grocery store, when I'm out in stores. And then it's made me realize on that grander scheme, people out in public, how quick we are to say, oh, they're just crazy, or get away, get away from the crazy person. Leave them alone. Something's wrong with them. It frustrates me because now I'm wondering, are these more people out in the public that have been misdiagnosed or ignored and avoided that are also living with this form of dementia? Because it's a behavioral.
It's like you're my twin separated at birth, I swear.
I know. That's why when I was reading through your blogs, I thought, oh my gosh, there's someone out there who knows what I'm talking about. They know what the frustrations of this.
I think I put a post up like that about being less judgmental of people when I'm out in public.
Yes.
So another symptom that caused us alarm with my mom was her driving.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't know, driving is such a controversial issue, and so I'm going to leave my opinions aside on that. But I want to say this. My mom had 3 accidents within about a month's time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And because she was making bad judgment calls and spontaneous movement, stuff like that. And I was out driving one day, and there was this older person, and they made a U-turn on a busy street that they had no business making a turn. And I said, I bet that person has dementia.
Yep.
Because there's no sane person that would do. Okay, sane is probably the wrong word. I don't want to get.
I know what you mean.
There's no rational thinking,
right,
that would cause us to do that.
Exactly.
I would not do that because I know that you don't make a U-turn in the middle of a busy street.
Right.
She got displaced, and I understand that. But instead of going into a parking lot space and, backing up, she just right in the middle of the street. And I'm like, oh my God, what's happening here? But to me, it was like alarms went off.
Yeah.
And, I get far less judgmental of people now. I don't just look at somebody and say, oh, they're crazy, because I understand that FTD starts with mental health symptoms.
Yes.
And behavior symptoms. And I also know, and I don't have statistics on this, unfortunately, because it's hard to find, but there are a lot of undiagnosed people sitting in jail cells right now.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I mean, I would bet, I don't know, 15% maybe? And that might be low, because when it's people our parents' age, people say, oh, it's a midlife crisis.
Exactly.
But does a midlife crisis make you do things that as a law-abiding citizen you normally would not do?
Right. The judgment is gone. Yep.
And then it's like, okay, so if the person is there for murder and they have FTD, how do you handle that?
Well, unfortunately, because there is so little education on it, then that person might get to the point of doing something like that. So what we do in our society, we lock them up, and then they get worse because they're not getting treatment.
Yeah. So
even before that type of scenario, you see, I feel bad that people in the world, just in general, walking, in the street, normal, in the stores, and you're going in back and forth and just kind of, I think I'm hypersensitive to it now. So before I would have been that judgmental person, and now I just look and quietly observe that person to see if in that short amount of time that I'm near them, what else are they doing? And if I can point out one or two, maybe three things, I'm like, yep, that's another person right there that most likely needs to be evaluated. But
that's the shame of it, is that we know the symptoms, we see the signs, we know what it is, but there's nothing we can do about it on the streets anyway.
Yeah, because you can't approach them and say, I think you might have this, I think you might need to look at it, because they'll look at you like you're the crazy person. Or they may even tell you off because how dare you tell me there's something wrong with me.
Or you're being discriminatory because, you think, oh, well, they have a mental health disorder or whatever. And it's like, no, I live this. I know what's going on.
Yeah.
Have you ever had the experience where people, like where you've been out with your mom and people compliment you on how you care for her? Because I know I've had that experience a couple of times, and it's really interesting. I know the first time it made me cry. Because this lady was like, oh, I'm so sorry. And she was just so sweet and so compassionate. And she's like, you do so well with your mom. And I think it made me emotional because I don't get that kind of support,
Right.
So
you were being recognized.
But I always find it interesting when people see me with her, and they're just people. And I just want to tell people it's okay to approach us. I'd rather educate you than you just stand there and stare at us.
Yep.
People are just always amazed. Oh, you take such good care of your mom, and she's so lucky. And it's really interesting how people respond to us out in public. So I was wondering if you get the same thing.
Well, I've had moments where Mom, she makes me nervous in public because as the years passed, I never knew what was going to come out of her mouth. And I was in that opposite where I felt like I should be wearing a shirt and dress her like she and I should be twins when we leave the house. And the shirt should say on the back of them, person living with dementia, or more specifically, person living with FTD. Because we've had those moments where we're out in public, and before, if you notice things, and ironically, this is something that growing up, Mom used to always tell me, if you don't have anything nice to say, then don't say it, anything at all. Just sit quiet. But we would get out in public, and eventually there would be some sort of moment happening, whether it was a screaming child or person that she didn't like the way their beard was. And she would make comments out loud, and I'm thinking, Mom, you're not thinking them, you're actually saying them out loud, just in case you didn't know that. And of course she'd curse at me like, of course I know what the F I'm saying, and leave me alone, and I know what I'm talking about. And it just created that awkward situation. So whenever I did have someone point out and actually compliment me on how I was caring for her, it was almost hard to take, because in my mind, I was like, you have no idea. You have no idea. But, yeah.
I'm fortunate that my mom never did or said anything embarrassing in public. Well, my mom would do, let us go up to people. She knew everybody. Everybody was her friend. So she would go up to people and she'd say, I know you. And they would kind of look at her like she grew a second head. And they'll go, you do? And she'd go, yeah, I know you. So I would say to people, she has dementia. She's got early onset dementia. Just go with it.
Right.
And people were always quite generous towards her, and I kind of look forward to taking her out again because we're both so bored being in the house. She won't be doing that, going up to strangers and saying things like that to them anymore. Although, it was always interesting because, people seem to take it pretty well. I had never had anybody to get her away from me or anything, rude or anything like that. They were always quite endearing towards her. She would go up to people and say, "I like your shoes." But I'm so fortunate that she has never, said anything embarrassing. Thank goodness.
Well, and that's another thing that I found interesting is that with this kind of dementia, the type of person of who they are before the symptoms progress, it gets exaggerated as they progress. So if they were a really nice, sweet, happy, fun-loving person, it just kind of gets where they become a little bit more quiet, but still smile, still that happy, loving, fun-loving person. But if they were aggressive or short-tempered, they usually progress in that. So it gets harder to be around that individual.
We went through about a 2 or 3 year period where my mom was kicking, slapping, punching, and finally one day I said to her, "You know what, Mom? You can't do this anymore. I'm not going to be able to take care of you if you're going to continue to hit me. This has to stop."
Yeah.
And eventually she did. She still gets a little aggression and she still tries to slap every once in a while. But she doesn't have the strength like she used to. I'm like, God. But one thing though I learned is that I had to change my approach with her when she was getting aggressive because she was doing something I didn't like helping her in the bathroom, something like that. So I had to learn how to change my tone and, guide more than tell her what to do, So, which helped a lot. It helped calm me down a lot. Yeah. I'm so thankful because I don't really ever want to place her if I can help it. She is so laid back now and so much more fun to be around now. I want to keep her home until she takes her final breath.
So I thought the same for myself until I reached my limitations. I reached my boundaries. And that's something that I recognize that as caregivers, especially as a caregiver of someone living with FTD, you do need to make it a point to define your boundaries and what your limitations are. Have you been able to do that as a caregiver for your mom?
I think that point for me when she was aggressive, physically aggressive, with the hitting and stuff. And I finally told her, "Hey, this has to stop, or we have to make other plans." And, she doesn't want to go anyplace else either.
Yeah.
And she's never wanted to be in any kind of facility, So I'll do everything I can to support her, to keep her home. But I know that's not possible for everybody.
Right.
I'm the person that believes if you can keep them home, keep them home. But if it's beyond what you can handle, then you have to do what's best for you. But for me, I love having her, and I'll continue to do it until until she closes her eyes.
So while you're doing that, what are your areas or your ideas of self-care? How do you maintain a self-care regimen so that you can do that?
I like to go for solo drives. I really enjoy driving. Sometimes I'll just drive around for a couple hours and blast the music in my truck and have a good old time.
Yeah.
And people look at me like I'm nuts because I'm singing in my truck, and and I'm like, I don't care. You don't know me.
Yep. They don't need to. You're having a moment.
Yeah. You don't know what I'm getting away from. So
yeah, that's awesome.
But yeah, and of course, got the blog, and I do webinars, and for me, it's I think helping others, I think, is a form of self-care for me.
Good.
Because it's just important to me. I mean, I do focus on me sometimes, but, one thing I don't do very well is sleep. Well, I've never really slept well, but I was listening to your podcast about sleep recently, and I'm like, I need to try to get that in check.
Absolutely, because you know what? That is something when I was, again, looking in hindsight, looking back at Mom's symptoms and in the years that she was declining and we had no idea, a lot of that time period was her living life in this insomniac pattern. And she did not sleep good. And so when you think about what sleep does for what happens to our bodies in that sleep mode, it is so incredibly important, because if you're not sleeping well, that means your body's not repairing well. And if you're going at this day after day after day and you see your temper starts to get a little bit shorter, like I know days that were harder for me is I usually didn't have a good night's sleep beforehand for Mom. And sleep is just something that you have to put as your priority self-care. And if you're struggling with sleep now because of the care, if like in the middle of the night type of care, and that's what's disrupting your sleep, then that's another one of those signs that limitations are present, and you've got to consider another route somehow that you get significant, adequate, deep sleep, not just a nap.
I've struggled with sleep all my life. I mean, it's just the way it's always been. My average is 4 to 6 hours. So, this has been a lifelong thing since I was about 11, I guess. My mom used to be up in the middle of the night. She didn't get up in the middle of the night anymore. She used to, try to get up out of bed or have accidents, and I'd have to go clean her out, stuff like that. But she doesn't. Nighttime isn't. I mean, sleep is still a luxury, but it's not, as bad as it used to be. I mean, there was a period that it was bad, but got through it.
Yeah. So are you able to maintain a routine with her still?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of stuff is still pretty much the same, except for we don't really, get to go out right now.
Right.
I've been taking her for a haircut since before COVID, and she loves going for haircuts. For some reason, the buzzing sound of the clippers seems to soothe her.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, there are some of our routine has been disrupted, but some of it is not much different. But it's always interesting to me. I have to laugh sometimes when I hear people complain about being isolated, because us caregivers have tasted isolation since before COVID.
Exactly.
Long before COVID.
Yep.
And, we know what it's like. So this is like old hat for us. We got this down to a science, but a lot of people don't get it.
I know. Unfortunately, they don't. And that was one of the things when COVID first started. I thought the same exact thing. The isolation, it wasn't really isolation to me. It was just more of the same. I had already been isolated years before COVID. And so it wasn't exactly something I was prepared to do, or something that I assumed I was going to be doing this type of care for Mom later, much later in life. I never expected to do it as early as.
No, I'm with you there. I did not expect to be doing this at, how old am I? 45.
Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't expect to be taking care of my 64-year-old mom, and I thought by now I'd be raising my own family. And instead I'm raising Mom.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the roles switch, and you become the parent. And I think at one point I would mention to others that, I felt like I had 3 kids. I had my sons and a daughter, which Mom felt more of like my daughter at some point.
Yeah, and the grief that comes along with this, anticipatory grief is hard.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the one thing that grieves me is that, when I do adopt my kids or however I start my family, she's not going to be there for it.
Yeah.
She's not going to, like, she had all these dreams of being a grandparent and taking them places and doing fun things with them and getting them involved in music like she did me when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's gone. Like, FTD has ripped so much from us and robbed us of so much. And, my future kids won't know who their grandmother was.
Right.
And even if I am lucky enough to start a family while she's still here, she won't be able to enjoy them like she wanted to.
Right. Yes, and that's the unfortunate thing is FTD takes so much from your loved one, so much earlier in life.
Mm-hmm.
And the grief that is there, I think, for me, the grief of feeling like I was letting go of my life to step into hers, the fear of the unknown, and then the realization that that relationship I always wanted to have, the mother-daughter relationship, was no longer going to be possible.
Yeah, it's like you kind of missed out on that adult relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah, tough.
So do you find yourself daydreaming more often? I know that's one thing it became my coping mechanism.
Daydreaming about what? Like, just
being in a different place, different time, a whole different reality.
No, I tend to be more in the here and the now. I think I do when it comes to the blog. About where I wanted to go, some ideas for things that I might consider doing in the future, but I tend to focus more on the now than anything. I think if I could, I'm a thinker. I'm always in my head. And that's not a good thing. Like, it makes me nuts.
Yeah, I was there too. I was definitely there too. And until this last year and a half, almost 2 years, I finally was able to drop out of my head and into my heart. And looking at the world in that way, or through my heart, instead of always thinking, is a whole different perspective.
Yeah, I think that's part of why I just have such a hard time sleeping. My mind is always going. It just doesn't shut off. It just, even when I'm sleeping, I'm thinking.
Exactly. I know what you mean.
It's nuts. Oh my God.
So there are several things that I wanted to remind the listeners as you have so graciously shared with us, Candice, your journey with your mother and FTD. And I wanted people to kind of keep things in mind, those who are also caring for their loved ones with FTD, and those that may just be curious if maybe by chance this may be something that they need to look into. But for caregivers, a few reminders to keep in mind with FTD. So you're going to want to maintain a daily routine, find things that help to provide predictable patterns and activities around, meals, household tasks, physical activities, all that kind of stuff. And even with spiritual development, you get to a point where prayer may be something that is soothing and calming for your loved one, and helping with that important regular sleep schedule as well. The other thing is you're going to want to have them engage in activities as often as possible, just to keep a lot of their skills and their thinking and their physical abilities going as much as possible. These activities sometimes will become frustrating or trigger some unwanted behaviors, but this is where, like Candice was referring to, you had to rethink how you approach them and try to help to avoid those compulsive, aggressive, or completely out of character moments. Another thing is, don't take it personally. FTD takes away self-control and the rational mind from our loved ones. And there are many, many times that I felt like mom was doing things on purpose to annoy me or hurt me. And so I had to understand not to take this as personal attacks. And one of the things that, if hopefully Candice made clear, is FTD is not well known. You will find doctors who misdiagnose or confuse it with other forms of dementia, like Alzheimer's. And your education may be helping healthcare or other service providers, believe it or not. So just know that this is happening, and it's not going to change unless better education is out there for people to learn about FTD.
I was going to say, one thing I can assure you of, your first diagnosis will probably be a mental health disorder.
Yes, exactly.
Because that's where they seem to always go first. Bipolar, schizophrenia,
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Manic. Mm-hmm.
It's the net that they're trying to whittle it down and figure things out.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, trust yourself. I mean, Candice and I were advocating for others to understand what serious medical conditions can manifest into in terms of mental health. So it deserves a lot of respect and competent care around this, but your opinion is valuable. Because you've lived through this with your loved one, don't be afraid to speak up and find that second opinion, sometimes even a third opinion if need be.
Mm-hmm.
Keep educating yourself.
Don't stop until you get the answer.
Yes, because the more we learn and grow with this and understand, the better we can help others and identify it and see it in others. And that's just going to add to more compassion, in addition to more understanding and the knowledge of how to care for people with FTD.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to reach out.
Right.
Set up a circle of support early, because you're going to need it. I promise you that.
Absolutely. You have to, the old saying that it takes a village to raise a child. Well, when our child becomes our parent, it's still going to take that village. And the sooner you reach out and the faster you're able to build that network around you, the better things will seem.
I don't know about, Alzheimer's and the other dementias, but FTD is a scary road.
Mm-hmm.
Because you never know what's coming next, and then you have to think about the future and the end result for anybody with dementia or anybody living really is death.
Right. Well.
And that's that can be really scary to think about. And then at some point you're gonna deal with grief.
Exactly.
And that, people don't tell you that. That you find yourself grieving the person that's still alive, and that's hard. I mean, I've been through it. It's so hard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we experience the loss of our loved ones as they progress with the FTD and not recognize sometimes that grief is situational depression. And if we don't tend to that grief, then that grief becomes depression. Depression can impede our care, our ability to care for our loved ones. So that is another thing that I want to make sure other caregivers understand. It is the best form of self-care for you to seek a therapist sooner than later if you feel like you're experiencing that kind of grief, because it just gets more overwhelming as time goes by.
Yeah, it can be all-consuming. Or at least it was for me when I go through it in cycles.
Mm-hmm, exactly.
And I mean, it's a daily thing, but like the real heavy stuff I go through in cycles, and it's hard.
Mm-hmm. It is. It can be. And it's one day that I know to think about positive things. Look on the bright side. Be grateful for this or that. Enjoy this or that, the time that I have with her. And I still fall through the cycle of grief. It is my natural swing, the yin and yang, where I go from the highs and lows from one day to the next, and sometimes throughout a day.
I mean, I have a blog post that I wrote called it was perspectives is everything, it's about having a positive perspective on things, but I also understand that it can't always be positive. Sometimes you're just going to have feelings.
Exactly.
But, having a positive perspective will help you get through the days that you're going through it. But, cherish the time, but also, give yourself the time to grieve if you need to. Just don't stay stuck in it, and at least try not to.
Exactly. That's the most important thing. Don't get stuck in it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Which is why the last and final tip I can give is take care of yourself. You must continue to re-energize your body, your mind, your spirit, and just to help you find ways to navigate through this continual changing of their world, your world, and the loss of your loved one in the way that it's forming. So Candice, what is, I guess, the best piece of advice that you can offer our listeners who are possibly dealing with frontotemporal dementia, or helping their loved ones live with this?
Do your best to cherish each day that you have with them, but, when you need a break, take a break. There have been times, earlier on when my mom was having a rough day and I would just have to step outside and take a breath. It's okay to walk away for a few minutes and go back later. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you can't deal with the situation in that moment. Take my advice down. I'll take myself and get some sleep. Because it really does matter. It'll help you get through your days. I know sleep is hard a lot of times when you're caregiving, but it really is necessary. And, try to just, go to your doctor's appointment and get the best nutrients you can in yourself, and, maybe even journal. Journal is good. Journaling is good. Mm-hmm. Especially if you don't have anybody around to talk to, because, you need to get your feelings out, your thoughts out, your frustrations out. And, come visit my blog or social media, you'll find support there too.
Absolutely. You definitely can find Candice on ourftdjourney.com. It's a wonderful blog. You'll be able to get a glimpse in the life of what it is living with FTD, what it's like. Candice, thank you so much for taking time with us today.
I appreciate it. It was good. I enjoyed it.
Good. I hope others understand the need for the education, and in the meantime, we'll be there to help educate as much as possible.
Well, I'm not going anywhere anytime soon. I'm in this for the long haul.
I'm glad your mother has you, and this has been great today for shedding light for others. I hope this gave you more food for thought. Until next time, be proactive. Take care, everybody.
Thank you for joining us today. We really hope you've enjoyed this episode. To learn more about proactive caregiving and to hear other episodes of this podcast, please visit www.jessicalizelcannon.com. This podcast is produced by Cannon Light Media, LLC, www.cannonlightmedia.com. Music provided by Chris Paradise.